Let's talk about some more criticisms of the government's response to the coronavirus. The next major criticism is going to be the economic package that it's provided to working people, both employees and businesses and self-employed. Ultimately, the response in terms of employees, although it is a positive that the government will ensure 80% of their salary capped up to £2,500, the scheme unfairly prejudices people who make a large amount of commission, sometimes up to 50% of their salary as commission. Some sales agents, well, they won't get any insurance, they won't get the 80% based upon their commission or bonuses. They will only get it upon their actual salary. That is unfair. When it comes to self-employed, well, it completely unfairly misses out nearly 2 million workers who don't earn over half their income in a self-employed capacity. That is completely wrong and completely unfair. People's income should be what matters. Whether they get it in a self-employed capacity or an employed capacity, or whether they get it through dividends or salary, should not matter. We should be insuring people's income, not where it comes from. There are many people that will have a business and will earn a little bit on the side in a self-employed capacity because that business may one day take off to earn them, to be the principal income earner for them, but may currently only earn them a few £1,000s a year. Well, if that individual earned 20 grand a year but earned 5 grand in a self-employed capacity, they wouldn't be getting a penny insured on the 5 grand self-employed under Rish's scheme, and that is completely unfair. It's unfair to those workers who are self-employed, who are both employed and self-employed. It is also completely unfair to the hundreds of thousands of workers that operate these owner-employee limited companies, where it's a limited company, they have limited liability, but they are typically worker owners. So the sole worker, Mrs. Smith Cleaning Services, is also the company director, and she will have been advised from her accountants to pay herself a small salary and the majority of her income in dividend payments, because dividends are slightly taxed, as far as I'm aware, less than income from salary. And so their accountants will probably have advised them to pay the majority of their income in dividends to avoid a bit of tax. And now, because they've done that, they will only get insurance on the small amount of salary they've paid themselves. Well, that is completely unfair, because now they will be getting hardly any income insured. And again, now is not the time to be petty and criticising people for avoiding a little bit of tax. The British government permits hundreds of billions to be avoided by the big multi-conglomerates like Amazon, Starbucks, etc. Going after the little cleaner or the little delivery driver who's been given advice and doesn't understand the tax system anyway because it's so complicated, in a time of a crisis pandemic, is immoral and wrong. We should be insuring that income, even if it's paid from dividends. We should be insuring it up to £2,500 a month. That's the morally correct thing to do. Another criticism of the self-employed bailout is that it unfairly hurts people who have a trading profit of over 50 grand a year, but who may have in the last few months invested a lot of that income in the business on software or equipment or whatever, or ordering stock and whatnot, but so now have no income essentially, and now will not be getting a single penny of help other than universal credit. That is again completely unfair. Just because they've had a trading profit of above 50 grand, they should be given assistance in this time. And also, when it comes to the actual businesses support, like SMEs and medium-sized firms and even large firms, there was talk of this coronavirus interruption loan scheme, where basically the government would provide, through normal high street banks, low interest loans that will help them get through this period. But apparently, even though the government is so-called insuring hundreds of billions of those loans, like 300 billion, they've only actually lent in the past week or so £145 million. And that's because apparently it's been reported on the BBC and other newspapers that the actual criteria that the banks are setting, that the banks have not been forced to cap the interest rate that they're giving on these loans, which is a disgrace. The government should cap that. And the criteria as well, the eligibility criteria, should be made by government, not these banks. Like, the banks apparently have put forth really onerous eligibility criteria, and they've even been requesting, in some instances, personal guarantees, which means that in the event the business, like, a small business in Greater Manchester that only has a small cash flow and is going to go bust if it doesn't get some urgent funding, if it takes a loan out for 100 grand, apparently the banks have been asking, some of them, that they give a personal guarantee, which means that in the event that they default on that payment, when there's risks involved, no one knows how the economy is going to recover after this, or how long it will take to recover, which would mean that the individual would lose potentially an asset or shares that he has, like his home or something like that, and that is completely wrong. He shouldn't have to take that kind of a risk, especially when the government are insuring 80% of that risk, so the public is taking that risk ultimately. And when the government is lending that money to banks at close to 0% interest, the interest rates given to borrowers should be very, very low. They shouldn't have to give personal guarantees, and they should be easy, simple criteria that provides liquidity into the market and gives businesses an urgent lifeline. Otherwise, many businesses with the current criteria are not going to be taking them loans, and many of them will go bust. And if they go bust, that will cause knock-on effects that could cause severe economic misery for large portions of the population. When we already know that the vast majority of businesses cannot claim on, business interruption cover because the whole insurance industry is a complete disgrace, and the government permits insurers to create these contracts where people think they're covered, but if you actually read the small print, it's not clear, but you wouldn't be covered in the event that something like a coronavirus pandemic hits. So the vast majority of businesses, even whether they know it or not, do not have cover. Maybe that will be argued and that will get to court at various points, who knows. But apparently many people who take out this business insurance cover, business interruption cover, will not be covered in the event that a coronavirus type pandemic occurs. And in many cases that will not be clear in their contract, but it will be argued by the insurer that, it definitely doesn't include for that, and so they won't be able to get any kind of insurance for that in the meantime. So they absolutely need these loans, but they will only take them if they're attractive enough and reasonable, and the current terms are clearly not reasonable. Otherwise, billions would have been lent instead of a pathetic 145 million that the BBC is reporting has only been lent.